We are looking at challenging conversations around current events today. And with that, we brought some diverse sources for that. A little bit different than our first session where we had three professors. We've got three different disciplines all together here today. So I'm excited to hear how they compare and contrast with each other. Um, I think we'll look at the land acknowledgement first, and we invite you to share your land acknowledgements or your area of the province from where you're at. I'm coming to you from Windsor, Essex County, and our land acknowledgement states that we acknowledge the land we are on and surrounded by water, originally inhabited by indigenous peoples who have traveled this area since time immemorial. This territory is within the lands honored by the Wampum Treaties, agreements between the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenni Lenape, and allied nations to peacefully share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Specifically, we would like to acknowledge the presence of the Three Fires Confederacy, the Ojibwa, the Odawa, and Potawatomi, and the Huron-Wendat peoples. We are dedicated to honoring Indigenous history and culture while remaining committed to moving forward respectfully with all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. So that's our area down here in Essex County. And we've had lots of great interactions in my classroom, my schools here with Caldwell First Nations, which are parts of some of these different groups that moved into this area away from the United States around the wars and the rebellions there. So Melissa is going to take you on to the next part.
Thank you, Butch. And so just like our previous sessions, we are familiar with these norms now, but just a quick overview of the norms we will be agreeing to, and hopefully you will agree to as well as we can be used in your classrooms tomorrow if that is something that you would like. I see that my internet connection is not stable, so please do let me know if I'm cutting out. But yes, we are hoping to have create a safe environment, challenge ideas, and of course approach all of this with humility and recognizing our position and perspective while being engaged in active listening. I'd like to thank our generous sponsors who is making this night possible for all of us, and of course for allowing us to use this platform where we can meet on Zoom, which leads us into organization. So of course, OHASTA, as many of you know, is our subject provincial organization, and we are partnered with AESHO, which is our French counterpart, and we are excited to be bringing this webinar to you and all of our colleagues as well. And finally, before I pass the time back to Butch, I just like to make sure we are all on the same page with the mute button. So make sure you have that mute button off. Well, on, sorry, excuse me, on, unless you'd like to participate, and we highly encourage that. Please feel free to chat in the chat box. Our colleagues are actively monitoring the chat, so if you do have any questions, comments at any point, please do hop on there and engage with us in that way.
Awesome. So we have a quote on the screen here, which I picked up a couple years ago. And while I'm explaining the context of it, I just invite you, if you have any quotes that you use regularly in your teaching practice, you can share that in the chat. So this one came to me as an attendee of Teachers Institute, Canadian Parliamentary Democracy back in 2020. And it came from Member of Parliament Elizabeth May. She said, critical thinking skills are essential to the survival of democracy. And I really thought that this was applicable for tonight's session because we're talking about current events, but and understanding and being able to analyze those events and apply them to both past and present is going to be really important as we went forward. She went further and kind of gave a harsh criticism, I guess, of the United States and saying that underfunding of public education was a big issue in the United States, and that was leading to some problems. So she was really encouraging us in Canada to take care of our public school systems and to say that it's a central part of our democracy. So our role as social science and Canadian World Studies teachers is to make sure that students are developing these skills because we've evolved, right? Like when I was a student, our teachers were the knowledge keepers at the front of the room, and Now the knowledge keeper is in their pocket. So it's about taking those sources that are around you and being able to understand what their goals are. So um, when I say the Teachers Institute, I think Sarah's going to plug in a link there. Uh, that conference is one of the top professional development things anyone in this group could ever do in their careers. I met Senator Deacon there in 2020, just before the pandemic. But we have a week on Parliament Hill where you get to stay behind the scenes with members of Parliament and senators. And I met Supreme Court justices. We met the Governor General. We had lots of opportunities for questions. The Library of Parliament hosted a fantastic week for teachers, and all of that was kind of funded through the Library of Parliament and the generous time with from your school board. So highly encourage people to take that opportunity and look for it. The applications are out now for the session in the fall of this year. So if you have any questions ever about that, I'm sure there's a couple members like Megan on the panel here, and myself. If you ever want to ask questions, I'll give you all the details on that. Fantastic opportunity. So one of the first things we've done in these sessions is go through some different teaching strategies. And the first one that we're looking at here is on the idea of critical thinking skills, and that's looking through primary source analysis. So those that have been using this before may remember this site from the Stanford History Education Group, also known as SHEG. It's now the Digital Inquiry Group out of Stanford University. And what they do is they generally look for an event and they pull in sources from different sources on the same topic. So controversial issue these days is the idea of looking back to the attack on the Capitol on January 6, 2021. Lots of heat and debate in the United States there. Anybody who's teaching American history knows that they had quite a bit of unpacking to do for that event to make sense. And this approach would essentially take a thesis statement about that and encourage people to attack it or defend it, depending on what side of the equation they were going to be arguing that day. So in this analysis, we have a source from ABC News. These are 3 different video clips. It's easier for us to show you video clips right now. We're not going to go through those video clips. You can peruse them at your own time, and they're going to be in the link. But for example, in this assignment, you would take these 3 different sources. The third one's more of a secondary source because it's years later. But have students that are going to say that the attack was something that was brewing beforehand. And then on the other side, you might have a statement that is going to say that the attack was a representation of what was happening in the democracy for years. The students are divided on each side, and then they're going to collect evidence from these same sources from different slants, pro or con, and then they're going to have to present these arguments to each other. At the conclusion of that, they're going to have to actually have a discussion where they combat each other's opinions. And at the conclusion of the entire exercise, you can actually have the students openly select whichever side they want and defend their opinions to submit that to you. So you're going to get a lot of critical thinking through the process because they may have to take a position that they're not really interested in defending. But ultimately, you're going to let them defend it at the end and use evidence. So as long as you do the pre-work on selecting good sources, this is actually a really effective teaching strategy to get your students talking about a controversial topic in a productive way with reputable sources. So I'll leave it to that. And we're going to go right into introducing our panelists for tonight. So I have the honor of introducing our first panelist. As mentioned before, I met Senator Deacon in Ottawa at the Teachers Institute. She was appointed to the Senate in February of 2018, and she comes to us with significant experience in education, so that should make a lot of people here happy. She's speaking from a knowledgeable background, 35 years in education in various levels, primary or elementary and secondary, and also some administrative capacities and a superintendent. She's most passionate about the physical and mental well-being of all Canadians and has been recognized with various awards, including the Women of Distinction and Lifetime Achievement Award for the YWCA and the Queen Diamond Jubilee Medal. So thank you for coming tonight, Senator Deacon.
You are
Nick.
most welcome. Oops.
Thank you so much, Senator Marty. Next, I have the pleasure of introducing to you Evie Kwong, and she is the Associate Director for Social at Wired Magazine. She was formerly the Manager of Audience and Socials at Vice News, focusing on amplifying intersectional stories and vulnerable voices in Americans and beyond. She was also the senior editor at Toronto Star and created the series hashtag In Their Own Voices and hashtag Millennial Money. So thank you, Evie, for joining us today. We are so excited to be hearing from you and your perspective from journalism as we talk about current events.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. And we also have Justice Paul Howard from my neck of the woods down here in Southern Ontario. He was appointed a judge of the Superior Court of Justice for the province of Ontario in March of 2015. He's practiced law for 27 years, and his civil litigation practice was devoted almost exclusively to education law and other public law matters. So definitely been a source that I've consulted on a few times, just having quick conversations about the law and education. But another I guess, jewel for us to dig into the idea of education law tonight as well. He's also the co-chair of the Windsor-Essex Ontario Justice Education Network Committee. Thank you for joining us, Justice Howard.
Thank you, Butch, who is the other co-chair of our OGED committee.
Thank you, sir. So we have some pretty diverse careers covered here with our panelists tonight. With some great connections to education, as we've said. With that in mind, I think we get right into our first discussion question with you guys. And I think I'll defer this to Justice Howard first. Have you utilized your personal experiences to help you interpret current events?
Good question. I'm going to take a bit of a different slant. In my line of business, I need to be aware of my personal slants and my personal perspectives and my unconscious bias when looking at a situation before me, whether it is a current event or a very current event that's happening in the courtroom before me. And so dealing with unconscious bias is challenging. It's not the easiest. It's something that judges get in-serviced in, and it's something that's constantly in the forefront of our consideration of events that are going on around us.
Excellent. Yeah, there's obviously going to be challenges there, and it's hard to shut that off like a tap every now and then. I'm sure it rears its head, but thanks for that answer. Evie, we'll turn it over to you. Different career here when we start talking about the media, but definitely sources are going to be an important part of your career too. So go ahead.
Yeah, of course. Just as Justice Howard said, obviously, with trying to maintain unbiased news, that's something that we're always fighting for, and we're always striving for that. I guess like my big thing, shout out to the teachers here to teach history and social science, because this is why I became a journalist. We were able to debate like you guys were talking about and all these kind of things. So that's really what kind of inspired me to be part of this. But my personal experience is I always give this example when I'm telling younger journalism students. When I used to open the newspaper or looked on TV, my parents didn't really engage with the news and didn't want to really know about it because they didn't see themselves represented in the news. The issues that we're focusing on was only for a particular group of people. And so when we don't have the news and we don't have a lot of alternative news sources, or there's only one, then that is not a democracy in terms of this whole scope of people's views, especially immigrants in Canada. And so for me, knowing that and knowing that there's some simple terms like that people maybe in this room will all know, even me, because we're in this, but like a cabinet shuffle, something really simple like that. I tend to tell people to over explain it because we don't remember, there's lots of new immigrants here. There's also younger people who haven't been totally engaged in politics. And so when I try to bring news, or we craft headlines, or we do social media to give the best kind of captions to really capture the story, we break it down in simple terms so everyone can have access to it. And I think that's the most important thing. Everyone needs accessibility to information, to news. And so my role there, taking my personal, experience, seeing my mom and, a lot of my family not understand how to access news properly or ones that you can rely on, is something that I made my mission in coming into the newsroom and trying to make it more diverse for other populations that may not be able to access this news. And so that's something that's really important to me in my journalism lens.
Yeah, excellent answer. And I don't really think about it too often that way, but when you're talking about journalism, you also have to do that in a condensed space. So that's probably even a larger challenge than I would have, say, in a classroom where I have time as an issue, of course, but not necessarily characters in an article. So uh, good points there for sure. Senator Deacon, same question. How have you utilized your personal experiences to help you interpret some current events?
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me, and looking forward to our conversation this evening. And we jump into this, but all of this, as we talked about bias earlier and breaking it down, the first two really key pieces, this is all based on our narrative and our backgrounds and experiences. And, whether I'm being a mom or whether I am trying to work through some incredibly courageous conversations when I was a teacher or a principal or an Olympic coach, all of those things were for me making sure we get the facts straight, making sure that we're looking at a balance and in seeking different perspectives and really digging in what is fact and what is opinion. And before I became a senator, that was a key part of my work over decades and decades and decades. I also think this language piece and comprehension and understanding of a message in the cabinet shuffle was a brilliant idea, but I've had to, and while some people feel it's insulting, the messaging that we send out, even when I was a principal, I forgot that 5 languages were considered and families were trying to figure out a message translating into Arabic or whatever it is, and wasn't clean and clear. And so I think that the advice given to me, looking at that grade 6 or 7 comprehension and making sure that you're including the languages of the audience you're targeting, are extremely, extremely critical. You have to have that familiarity before we're really looking at fact, opinions, and critical thinking skills, which we're working on from the very, very young ages. But those things have been a key part. And coming into the role of Senate and working with some very sensitive and difficult issues right now, foreign affairs, international trade, defense, and war are my portfolios. So I am getting very, very raw, very candid information and testimony and witnesses. And so I need to be on top of this. And I draw back from so many of those experiences in my first 35 years.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm glad education was able to help you in that with those transferable skills, getting into difficult conversations there. Because I know we have them in the classroom on a regular basis, but they definitely seem to be coming at us faster these days, right?
If I could, can I respond to that, or I'm not sure protocol here? Okay, so just cut me off when you need to. It's critical, and the skills that I'm saying to I work with a lot of these provincial groups. I was part of one, and the things that you're doing in the classroom, the things you're doing in the community, the things that you're doing to push yourself professionally and get out of your comfort zone, all are critical. My work now, over and over again, I get asked, how did you learn to build consensus? How did you learn to collaborate? When did you listen, and listen constructively, and listen more for clarification, for meaning, for understanding? Why do you seek different perspectives? And I always attribute that back to my background in education.
Great answer. Inspiring too, because it is sometimes difficult when you're in the trenches these days, having those conversations, to realize that you're actually picking up these skills and utilizing them for future applications, right? Excellent. So Melissa, we can go on to you for the second question.
Thank you, Butch, and I'm just learning so much from all of your wonderful responses. So I'm excited to talk about our next question here. Our second question is this: how do we ensure balance when analyzing current events? So first, I'm just going to pass the time to Evie. I think it's interesting when we're talking about analyzing current events, but how do you approach it, considering you have the role of telling a story in a balanced way, and your specialization in something I appreciate is your care in representing different perspectives as well. So.
Yeah, no, this is such a great question. And I think I can talk mostly, like, I'll talk mostly about the stuff I did at the start because I think audiences will know those stories more closely. But I think, with a current event, whether it may be the van attack, that horrific van attack that happened on Yonge Street, or was something like anything like that, is obviously, as a journalist, as a person, it's super hard to cover. But even in terms of like any crime stories that happen. So when I first entered into like Toronto Star, like my first day, the protocol was that we take, the what's it called, press releases from the police, and we just write it up in a different way, and it would just get published. And obviously, there's a load of issues that could come with that because if we're looking for a balance, like depending on the situation and everything, just taking stuff from, basically a server that we get all the time might not be the most balanced way to tell a story. And I know in many circumstances, we went through a lot of trainings, a lot of, anti-bias trainings as well, but just leading my team to know that, there's some communities obviously that don't see the police in general as like a safe entity. And that's very fair. That's just truth that we have to acknowledge. I think that's something that happens. And so when there is a situation and we can try to get as many sources on the ground, of course, send our own reporters out there. If it happened in a nearby area, like where there's shops, and I'm in Toronto, so basically this happens all the time, I'd get my reporters to go talk to bystanders, talk to store owners, and they are resistant, but I do want to get them try your best to get the full story. The more perspectives, like we were saying before, on a situation is important. And that is really the case in terms of the biggest change that I've seen out of, the protests of George Floyd is that we really have to double check and consider what's exactly in the police statement. Not saying that, they're lies, or not saying that this outright, whatever, but it's not okay, like in journalism these days, to just rip that off and put that up as a news story. I believe that like we have moved past that, and there's lots of newsrooms doing trainings around that, though sometimes it still happens. But that's just one of the many examples that when we interact with that, we just want to make sure that we are representing the most voices and the most balanced way of telling this kind of story before, upsetting an entire community, where this has happened so much in the Toronto area, in like Jane and Finch or Regent Park, how we can just call it a crime riddled place and just leave it like that because we're just ripping from these straight kind of police statements. And, the consideration of using different photos when we represent different types of criminals of different backgrounds. That's something that we definitely have to work through and to offer that balance. If we're going to do it for everyone, if we're going to do it for some people, we got to do it for everybody, or we do it the other way. And so that's something that I'm working through with each newsroom that I enter, including Wired, where we're at now. And it's really important to me that we kind of keep up with actually, how the population feels. And that's just like the way that we can try our best to get closer to objectivity. It will never be perfect. I would say that in journalism.
Thank you, Evie. And I love how this kind of ties to what Justice Howard earlier mentioned about unconscious bias, because unconscious bias doesn't only exist within ourselves, but society at large. So thank you for your advocacy and for your work in representing those voices. So with that, I'm going to point the same question to Justice Howard, seeing that your role has a lot to do with balance and in weighing facts to decide on a verdict. So what are your thoughts on this?
Two things come to mind. One is to try and approach the issue again with awareness of unconscious bias, and you're trying to approach it with an open mind. There's, in my place of work, there's not much opportunity for discourse in the way that is possible in a classroom. The other thing that I think is a challenge here to balance in society large is identity politics, and that troubles me. That phenomenon. It has the power to exclude points of view. It has the power to distort, and it has the power to isolate us. So for educators, I think it's about creating safe places where students can share openly ideas. I think it's a question of turning their minds to perhaps a perspective that they haven't considered before. Those kinds of things are important for a balanced, objective, open-minded view.
Thank you, Justice Howard, and thank you for bringing up the idea of identity politics. Did you want to kind of elaborate what you mean by that, just so some of our participants can better understand the terminology we're using?
You see it in society at large. I'm identified with this background. I'm identified by this. It's usually personal characteristics. And sometimes it has a way of distorting and reducing discourse, because I'm really only interested in talking about those issues from my perspective, given my identity as I choose it. It's basically one-track thinking, and it inhibits balance, because I see the world through whatever particular identity prism that I have.
And our identities are so complex, Justice Howard. Like you're saying, in Canada, as a multicultural society, I've had ancestors in this country that go back to the 1600s. And I mean, which identity are you looking at? French, Canadian, English? Are you looking at Indigenous roots? Like, it becomes far more complex, right? As you select where you're at. Sorry, I didn't mean to intervene.
No, exactly. Exactly.
Thank you very much, Justice Howard, for your insight on this. And of course, I'm going to pass the time to Senator Deacon and to share your insights, having to work with people all across the countries in addressing an issue. What are your thoughts on ensuring balance as we analyze current events?
Well, thank you. And first of all, we cannot, and with your students and with your classrooms, spend time on identity politics. I think that question has been responded to in a very professional way by Justice today, but this is a huge issue that, with the growing diversity, has made it much more prominent than I think most people think about. So I do encourage you to bring that in the stream of your learning with your students. And I also would say that the press release discussed earlier, a press release 5 years ago no longer cuts it. It's not 20 years ago. It's not 10 years ago. Is the copy, cut and paste, this will do the job. Oops, didn't quite really think about the receiver on this, is really something that's a basic tool, has been really botched up. And you can't take those back once they're out. And so I can't underestimate that comment earlier on the press release part. When I look at the balance in analyzing current events and our young people, my real number one thing is ensuring that we teach, model, poke away at the difference between opinion in news and reporting. And so one of the basic, simple ways to do this, and we do this with adult groups also, is to provide them with 3 different articles. And one article, 2 articles could be opinion pieces, and one article could be coming off a Canada Press, Associated Press, like Reuters, something like that. And then ask them to first themselves, and then as groups, discuss any differences they saw in their comparisons. So the real practical examples are out there. I would say, if we're looking at a very topical and tragic issue right now, in the instance of the Gaza Strip, You could pick an event, and there are many, sadly, the Al-Shifa hospital attack, and look at that as an example, where two op-eds are out there, where Hamas is using this as a base for their operations versus this is a war crime, and as well as an article that's just a straight reporting of the attack. That is a very timely, pertinent, relevant activity, and I think people need practice at it. People need to have some, good peer back and forth by themselves and in small groups. When I look at my work, there's just so many examples of this, but for me, it became very important during the convoy in the winter of 2021. We were doing a lot of issues. We were dealing with a lot of hearsay. We were dealing with a lot of opinions, facts, op-eds, comments, what was really happening. We were also dealing with emergency sittings for the MPs and for the Senate, and then eventually looking at invoking the Emergency Measures Act. So for me, I had to put on that winter snowsuit and toque and walk through this whole experience, from people that live in the residences to the whole security setup to my office, which had very unhealthy materials plastered on the windows, to the whole feel, and then talk to people to learn more about where they're getting their information. Show me your source. Many of them really deep in the underground Facebook. There's been many of those since, but that was a really enlightening experience for me, to be feet on the ground and finally saying, look, we're making decisions, and I'm not sure what is real and what is not. The most recent one is last week, having a medical doctor who literally flew in from the Gaza Strip after going in to run a hospital for a week and a half, and gave us the story on the ground that wasn't filtered through any media sources. So you can't always do those things, but it's what can we do that's in place of that is forcing the thinking and being able to look at these pieces very, very objective, very actually scientifically, and discerning opinion from fact.
Thank you, Senator Deacon, and thank you for providing those practical strategies for us. And I can't agree more that this is something we do have to practice. It's not something we can just magically adopt, especially when we are, often immersed into our own algorithms and, hearing the same perspective over and over. So thank you for your insight on that. With that, I'm gonna pass the time back to Butch for our third question.
Yeah, I think all three of these panelists have kind of addressed the third question in a way already, which is speaking to the idea or the credibility of these sources, and how important that is in the process of getting to the truth, right? So if the goal in the classroom and the goal in the Senate and the goal in the courtroom and the goal as a reporter is to get to the truth, we got to keep digging, right? So the question is, how are you verifying the sources that you receive for accuracy within your respective professions? Challenging, right? Because you're all getting fed information at different times and for different purposes. But we're hoping that the follow-up question would be that we might have any specific tips that you guys would have that might be transferable to students and teachers there. So we'll start with Senator Deacon. How are you verifying sources for accuracy at the
Yes,
Senate?
thank you. And thank you very much. One of the, I think we may have started learning this in grade 10, I'm not sure, maybe 9 or maybe 12, but definitely in post-secondary and in university. And that is following the footnotes. I mean, it feels like a broken record. Again, pulled right out of the education experience, but if you follow the footnotes, not only should any piece have references, but then it's important to dig into those sources to make sure that they are peer reviewed, or if they are later retracted. It happened to me this week on something very compelling and believable that I almost reacted to. And it was something that was said, oh, Trudeau announced this effective January 2025. And the announcement related to banks was so far off that I'm thinking, oh my gosh, is this possible? And it took going back and going through that exact same process We how do we help our students to get away from reading a paragraph online and coming away from it thinking that that is the story, that is the truth. Any simplistic arguments need to be challenged and need to be questioned, and need to be done that in a respectful and comfortable way also.
Excellent. Yeah, and we'll ask you the same question here, Evie. From your media perspective here, we're going to be looking at a different focus for sure. So what do you do for verification of your sources?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think each newsroom has this overall set of, we there's a lot of things we have to check off, even if it's just a bystander there, definitely need to get on the phone, need them to share some original videos and photos to ensure that we can put them in the piece if possible. There's a lot of things to see, like even if you were at the scene, how much were you at the scene? Like, why are you here? Like, so a lot of it ends up being that's why these bigger news stories take a long time. Again, we don't want to do the quick news hit where it's like the press release or it's just one person saying something and then it just goes up. That will never be able to cut the news. And I think it shouldn't, and it does all the time, which is what we were talking about when we're talking about, how was the story written and stuff like that. Like, just for an example, if no one really caught on yesterday, BlogTO went on this rampage about doing April Fool's stories yesterday, which were very like if you saw it, you'd been like, wow, this is crazy. I think there was one that's like the Rogers Center has food under $10 now. And that's such a clickbait thing, but it's clearly for April Fool's Day. If you don't know the media cycle or what they're doing today, and you pop onto Twitter for 1 second or wherever you are, Facebook, and you're like, whoa, that's crazy. Let me tell my friends. That's how stuff like that really trickles down. And if you're not The Onion and if you're not people that are doing satire, that's something I would lean super, super far from. And so that sort of campaign they run, though it was funny for the media folk in the room who could really understand that's what they're doing. It's like such a siloed place in journalism where people think that they understand the jokes we're making and that we understand that, but mostly people outside of this are not really well trained in terms of like going through social media, going through the internet, seeing what sources are verified. They'll grab that paragraph, like the senator was saying, and just like go through it. And so that ends up being shared. And I'm just talking about a funny BlogTO story, but it happens all the time across all different types of news networks and also publications. And so that's one thing that is very, very frustrating that we still are fighting within our own industry. But in terms of my own, if I'm sending out my reporters out there, I need them to fact check with like photos, evidence. And I think the biggest thing, and we can talk about this a bit later, but it's like this whole Buckingham Palace rollout, like the whole that's the primary source thing. We can talk about it too. But we had our photo team look really, really closely at every single part of that photo before we even ran it on our site, which we didn't. And so it's stuff like that we really at Wired, we're taking the time to really look, but there's also newsrooms that move a lot faster and they rely on also like AP and Reuters, which is our Wired sources. If they say yes, that means it's okay, which is they have to retract the image after. And so there's a lot that goes into it. But again, like if we're talking person to person, you go into the scene, I'm going to need some photo evidence, some sort of background, full name, every single thing about this person before we can really put them into an article and be like, okay, yeah, for sure. And this doesn't mean like someone who's a professor or needs that title necessarily, unless you're talking about like an expertise thing, but it's just for every single person we put in, we're responsible for them. And we're responsible for people reading this kind of news too.
Great answers and very interesting to hear from the media perspective because I know you guys really have to dig. And you're probably the only one that could answer the question and the follow-up, and I'll give you a minute to think about it, Evie, because it's off the top of my head. But obviously there's 4 major school boards that have come forward and kind of attacked where students are getting their information from with a major lawsuit there. And I'll let you speak to that in a minute, but I'm going to get Justice Howard's um, response here first onto this question. So how are you verifying your sources in the courtroom, Your Honor? I know you can't speak specifically to cases and issues there, but I'm sure you're not always being told the truth when you're there either. So
what's the most effective way to determine if a source is accurate? Forgive my bias, but cross-examination. And when you had one of your first slides on teaching strategy 1, primary source analysis, that's very close, right? That's very close to the courtroom experience. Develop a thesis statement, have a position, challenge it, get your sources, blah, blah, blah. We have the benefit in most cases of cross-examination. I think of certain challenges in some of the work that I do. We have an awful lot of self-represented litigants. That can be a challenge. You don't always have, well, in theory, you don't always have the commitment to objective professionalism that lawyers are supposed to live up to. But it's also a very human experience that I know what I saw. I know what I know. I was there, and it's a whole it's a whole it's a field day in postmodernism, really, because one basic event, and it went down a particular way. It could only it had to be only one way, and yet different witnesses from different perspectives um, view the same event, um, not always completely differently, but it's an interesting exercise to see how witnesses view a particular event and how they quickly um, take that position that I know what I saw, and it's not in family law. I don't know, this idea just popped into my head. In family law, where mother and father are disputing, where who had the children on what days, what proportion of time do they have them, et cetera, et cetera. And I, when frequently confronted with uh, vastly differing accounts of where the children, were on a particular day, well, unless the laws of physics have changed, they can only be at one time, in one place. And we're just, between the two of you, we don't seem to be operating on that same basis. So being open to consider your perspective, being open to think, well, did I really see it that way? Those can be challenges.
For sure. And you remind me of what I often say with my law teachers, which I learned from you in the OGEN process, and that's that witnesses will see things completely different, right? So the least reliable type of testimony when we get into these trials is that, and we have to be able to know that students are going to see things differently as well, even if they're looking at the same things. So it's an easy transferable skill.
Yeah.
The problem is when we get into those positions and we take a position and we defend it to the death rather than trying to grow through it, right? That's when it becomes a real problem.
I know what I saw. I know what I heard. Identity politics, all different ways of not keeping an open mind, not being objective, and protecting my turf, if you will.
Yeah. Evie, I'll come back to you on that because I wanted to give you a chance just to speak to it because it's a relatively recent thing here. If you want to, if you don't want to, I can move on to the next questions. But if you want to say something about that, then I'll leave it to you if you like.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a huge thing. Like the four school boards coming together to in $1 billion lawsuit, billions of dollars of lawsuits against social media companies, which is so interesting because I definitely am in this intersection of trying to get the news and information to people, like to make it accessible, like the stuff that we have. Our reporters work months and years on, and like investigations that are really important to them. Just like yesterday, we had a story about how Google incognito mode isn't really incognito, and really your privacy is not that private when you use Google incognito mode. That's information I would think everyone in the world probably would want to know that, but it does get shut out by these mega companies, and that makes sense. Like with Meta, and especially on Instagram, there's no more news can't access news. So that's in Canada. And so that's one thing. And so now anyone who has their own account can start spreading stuff. And if they grow, it just grows. And so I understand the misinformation because of the policies these social media giants are putting in, where they don't want their news publishers to be so part of it, or like not too much political news and stuff like that, is actually really detrimental. I'm really worried, because then instead you get the rise of these influencers with, we don't know the background of how they verify their sources or how they come up with their opinions, and if they even know the dichotomy of opinion versus news, where they just start speaking to people, and then if you're maybe on the receiving end, you're like, yeah, that must be the truth. So I understand that. Like, I totally agree with social media giants have this kind of full reign to do whatever they want because of how much they bring in, even so much that the news publications themselves can't control it. And so on our end, my job is to try to get the information out there, but we don't have as many resources as the actual company does. But I do find that there is obviously a place for community for some people, especially younger students that want to use TikTok and they want to be on there. I get it. And it's like something that's hard to stop because it's so permeated in our lives. It's part of, like, they grew up with it basically. And so to put the hard stop to it and try to put the age limits and the bans, I know what's happening in the US with TikTok. They're trying to push that through. It seems like it's going in the right direction there, in terms of, like, it's going to be banned in terms of how Congress is looking at it. And also, in Florida, kids under 14 can't access social media. My only thing to that is that the extreme bans, like, kids in all generations and all decades have found ways around it. And the more taboo it sounds, instead of getting a hold of it and being like, look, we know you're going to be on this, and, like, no matter what I do, no matter what I say, like, you're going to be on it and formulate your own opinions through this or watch this. It's almost like it's already in our lives. So what can we do now to make sure social media giants are held accountable? So that's why I think this lawsuit, if it's like, correct for these kind of reasons, it's like, I think that would work very well. I just think that the one thing in all our lives and past lives is that kids will always find a way around something, whether it be playing games or learning something here or doing chat and this. And so social media is just the one thing that's so part of people's lives. And I know teachers, you see it all the time. And so instead of that, maybe if there's lessons to see how to verify sources, or like why getting offline is also really important too. It's exactly. I agree, like what Megan is saying. It just, that never really works. I don't think the ban is like the answer, because people will find ways around it. And if it's not the kids, someone will find a way around it for them. And that will be the next big thing that they're on. So it's more just getting a hold of it and finding ways to control it and get some information that you can curate, like, as the adults, as the teachers in the room. I hope that there's ways to, like, build that confidence. And that's what we're trying to do with news and trying to get our stuff out there. No matter how loud every other voice is, it's really hard to compete against. And really, it's the full reign of these social media giants to do whatever they want. And a lot of it's moving towards branding and influencers, which could be scary. So that's really where it's at.
Yeah, the motivations are the key questions when we get into that. I know Justice Howard can't speak to it, and I don't want to speak for Senator Deacon, but if there's anything you want to add to it, Senator, you can. If not, then I can go on to our next question.
I just want to say something quickly, and so great with having my colleagues here tonight. Evie, there were three things as I was listening to that we've all followed. One, of course, is you talked about April 1st, and what the messages that were put out yesterday, and of course Taylor Swift caused a lot of momentum, and then the Kate Middleton, not from the story of her health and well-being, but the learning from that media cycle. I thought was interesting, particularly as it went on for a while. And of course, the four school boards. Those are the things that were in my head as wonders. And I think you've been able to go through and explain those quite well. One of the other pieces that just got touched on that I'd like to mention is this whole area of influencers. It is big. It is something that can lure and draw our young people in. It's got a sort of a sexiness to it, and also a monetary incentive. So understanding influencers and I think that also has to be a really critical part of the learning for these young people, because they can get drawn in quite quickly. Thank you.
Awesome. We're gonna go through a speed round here for the last one to kind of get it in, right, Melissa? So you got your last question to go through. I'll pass it on to you.
Excellent. And just really quickly, it just reminds me of our conversation we had with Carla Peck in the beginning, where she talked about the idea of pre-bunking, rather than running away from AI, the rise of technology. Rather than running away from it, we should be leaning into it and teaching our students critical thinking in this way, learning about the strategies that are used to engage people, to draw people in, the clickbait, the emotional aspect of it, and how it all ties in there. So, which is perfect because it ties into our next question, which is how does modern technology distort primary evidence? And as we know, the democratic nature of the internet is wonderful because it gives people a lot of access, to express their voice. But on the flip side, it's also very easy for people to create fake news, disinformation, as Evie has mentioned before. So I'm going to pass the time first to Evie, if you could just speak to that.
Yeah, I'll move really quickly because I want to hear everyone else too. But biggest example is that, yes, the Kate Middleton breakdown. So that was actually a primary source because it was shared by like the actual Buckingham Palace. However, usually photo editors across AP and everyone are going to put a critical lens to it. But because of the how it's signed under the Buckingham Palace, you don't really question it for a second. It's sort of like how people think of NASA and stuff. But even like that, when it's something so primary, like it is also caught by people on the internet, it is insane. And that's when really all the conspiracy starts spiraling. Like there was conspiracy that linked everyone in the world, that all down to this situation, which is insane. That's where really things get kind of really convoluted and then move to like very extremist groups. And then there's a whole nother thought about that stuff. And so what I can basically say is like, yes, we like to, it's sort of like social media. Let's try to get to a point where we can try our best to understand social media, just in the same way we're trying to learning about AI. We can't stop AI. AI is moving full force. I know 20% of workers in America are using right now, which is a jump in just like 4 months from 12% to use it in their business and place of work. And so it's not stopping. No matter how far we want to go and how scary it is for people and workers, it's just progressing and people are investing in it. And so what can we do right now to take a hold of it is try our best to understand it, to fix it. These are learning issues. And so at Wired, we really focus on this tech stuff, really breaking how AI fails. It's not there yet, how we have to be really critical and how people are using it to write all their things from, they could be like a whole project to or whatever. So like understanding where you can catch those signs and everything, and also instilling it into the students so they know like, hey, this is coming, this is going to be big. But just being really critical because it is really, really, it's important in case like something like the Kate Middleton thing or any other thing happens, anyone can fabricate anything. And some of these people are really talented at doing so. So that's something to really keep in mind of.
Thank you, Avi, and I can't agree more with leaning into it. As taboo things always has its way of coming back and stronger, if anything. So next, I'm just going to pass the time to Justice Howard, and I'm just curious. And of course, if you're not able to speak to it, please do let us know. But have you had an experience with this in the courtroom when we're dealing with primary evidence?
Not directly, but we all know it's coming, right? And in terms of evidence, no, but certainly there have been cases. But I would just step back because, it becomes an emotionally loaded question. AI, everybody's going to be out of work, who's going to be the next John and Sarah Connor, and the sky is falling, the sky is falling. And artificial intelligence has been with us for a considerable period of time. If anyone Googled today, you used artificial intelligence, right? All of the logarithms that Instagram knows to send me recipes for Italian cuisine, artificial intelligence. It's not all that bad. It's not all that new. Some aspects obviously are the generative AI. That is new, and that is something that every profession is going to have to grapple with. My brother owns an IT company. He's got the absolute greatest slogan in the world for an IT company. We do Windows. And my brother says it's not the case that AI is going to replace lawyers or insert whatever profession. It's that those lawyers who don't learn how to harness the power of AI are going to fall behind in a competitive disadvantage. So we've seen it in the courtroom. Like there's year ago, there was a very famous on the eastern seaboard that experienced, ChatGPT hallucinates, and it can still just make up things that don't exist. In that case, it made up a series of judicial decisions that had citations, names, descriptions of the facts, all just the AI hallucinating. We've had a similar situation in BC, where a lawyer in Vancouver was disciplined by their law society for it. Courts are currently grappling with it. I think Manitoba was the first to have, or the Manitoba Court of Queen's Bench, basically the Superior Court of Manitoba, was the first to have an actual express policy on it. It's courts are fairly reactive, so it's a little bit too early for us to decide how we're going to use that. I think disclosure and notification is going to be a base requirement, so that if work is being submitted to the court where AI was used in part, that is something that's disclosed. Last, I'm just going to end quickly on a positive point. Last July, I attended a conference of technology in the courtroom, basically, and we were given samples of writings, documents, policies, and the group of judges was asked to survey, and was this written by a human or was this written by artificial intelligence? The fact that they were all judges means nothing. You could, a bunch of educators, doesn't matter. I'm convinced that it wouldn't matter. It's just a bunch of humans looking at it, and in each case, and one of the policies was extremely. In each case, the humans were able to identify what writing was written by a human and what writing was written by AI. So, an encouraging thought.
Humanity can survive. Perfect.
That's right.
Thank you for those anecdotes, and I find that very interesting. I was actually expecting to hear that no one would be able to distinguish from the AI writing and human writing. So thank you for sharing that.
In one case, they wrote an employment policy, and in one case, somebody observed it's absolutely too perfect. No human could have written that. So
Fascinating. Thank you. Thank you, Justice Howard.
thank
And
you.
I'm going to pass the time to Senator Deacon. Is there anything you'd like to add in your take on how technology impacts our view of primary sources?
Oh, for sure. And a couple of things I'll say. First of all, let's look at our context and our reality. AI and technology, as was said earlier, has been here for a while. But decision makers, and I'm going to use political decision makers, I could even use the Senate as an example, are folks that are quite often in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. They're very fearful. They don't understand. So our job, and I have been working on this because I'm from Waterloo, and I brought in some of the quantum people, some of the CG folks, the think tank folks, and some of the AI folks in to just continue, I'll say continue the process of better educating those who are making decisions. I mean, it's quite something to talk to someone who's 12, 16, 22, 35, 45, 55, but there are many people who think that this is wrongly, but think this is just a whole brand new thing that's going to wipe them out. So I say that just as an awareness from a decision-making perspective. But then in the same breath, which sounds almost contradictory, Canada has lost some momentum as a global leader and some of the global work they're doing. And we could have different opinions on this, but I would support this, that there are things that we need to do to step up to the plate on our global stage that we could be doing. And one of those areas deemed and agreed upon by the G7 and the G10 and summits galore is leading this area of AI and technology. So I just wanted to give you that little tidbit sort of at the front end. I'm not talking to the specifics of it, but those are two things that are also coexisting in the bigger picture. When you talk about how does modern technology distort primary evidence, I'm going to distill this down to super, super simple examples. It does so, I think, in manipulating records of events to fit a narrative that only shows certain parts of the story, certain parts of the information. And this is, to make it fit into sound bites, to make it fit into the different mediums of communication. The one example I think we can all remember is the really wildly lofted study which showed mask mandates don't work. They just don't work. It was presented as proof that masks don't work, for instance. And when anyone who bothered to read the thing that showed that they didn't work because people don't listen and abide by them. Technology and algorithms, specifically algorithms, reward sound bites and quick passages, quick clicks, quick videos. Context can be lost. And the context being lost and people using these short clips as their primary source of information reinforces their own opinions. So, for summarizing that kind of concept I'm trying to share today, short answer is modern technology removes context.
Thank you, Senator Deacon. And I can't thank you enough for bringing it back to the idea of perspective, because your point on how, we manipulate, not we, but like people manipulate sources to create a certain story. Well, we can combat that by going back to our first question when we talk about balance, keeping an open mind, being aware that there are other perspectives out there. We can have a more nuanced view rather than thinking, this is it. This is the one storyline. So I think it's a great way to wrap up our conversation there. And I think I speak for all of us when I say that I thank you so much for sharing your insights, Senator Deacon, Justice Howard, as well as Evie. I've personally learned a lot. I've wrote a ton of notes that I definitely will keep and refer back to. And with that, I will conclude our panel discussion here and pass the time back to Butch for our next segment.
Yeah, I totally echo what Melissa said. Thank you so much for everybody here. I think we did talk about this beforehand with Senator Deacon's staff that was there to assist her tonight. Looking at the idea of just doing a group picture here. So if you would want to put your camera on, the senator might take this to promote some social media on there. If you don't want to have your camera on, then you can shut them off. That's fine. But we'll say that we're going to take a picture or a screenshot here in about 10 seconds. So using technology for positive things here, right, Senator Deacon?
Yeah.
I can take it. It makes you hold for a minute. So if everyone has, I think we gave enough time. So in 3, 2, 1, hold. Beautiful. I got it.
Awesome.
Can I just add one other comment? Can I just say one
sure.
other quick thing here? You just reminded me of something that came up this past week. And it was not an educator, it wasn't on the Senate, it was another presentation I was doing with some business folks. And they will not, and I'm not saying this to do any judging, because I don't know in this call who's on or off. They've now are implementing a policy that if you're on a Zoom call, you're doing hybrid, your camera must be on. And I've done presentations with hundreds of folks where many I just do my thing and I just asked how it was going, because some people are wanting to get to a meeting, but they're on a phone or they're in their car, they're doing their very best to get there. But I just remember what it was. It was a Toronto business person just started that, saying, we don't, if you're not on, we don't talk. And they're looking, they want the cues now. So it's just related to communication, which is why I'm only bringing it up today. And it just happened a few days ago, so it was fresh in my mind. And folks who are all with the History and Social Sciences program, I speak to gazillions of grade 10 civic students and elementary students. I do it virtually, I do it in person. So if you need any help in those areas, just tell your staff. I'm happy to try to make something work. That sounds like a public service announcement now that I've said it, but there you go.
It's all good. Definitely, I've had senators come in through the Cengage program, and that's been really beneficial. And thank you for joining us at this event too, Senator Deacon. And Justice Howard, great to see you again. We'll see each other on Thursday. And Evie, it was great to hear the media perspective on that. So cool to really think about how much thought goes into those sources and details to kind of tell a story, and probably a great underappreciation from many to see that work that goes into that to make sure that you're a reputable source for good information. So thank you for your work on that. It's very important in our democracy. The next phase here is where we're going to go into some breakout rooms. Looks like we'll probably end up going down into two, and our guests are invited to join us if they like. If not, that's fine. They've done more than enough of the heavy lifting for tonight's session, so I really appreciate that. In theme with what we're looking at here, the evaluation of sources. One of the strategies that came to me through the IB program was pushing of the OPCVL chart, and that is looking at every source with greater depth in the origin, the purpose, the content of that, and then the value and limitations of them. There are a couple of links that Sarah will drop into the chat. One is going to be this image here on the side. A second is going to be a video that kind of goes through how to utilize this source in greater depth. And the third will be a chart that takes things that might in the cross section. So the origin, for example, of a story about colonization could be talking about how it's written from a Jesuit priest who arrives in Canada on contact. And you can go through that origin in great depth, but if you go down below that in the chart, the way it's set up, the value of that would be that it's a great primary source, but the limitations might be that it's only coming from the perspective of the Jesuit priest and not from the indigenous people that were there at the time. So there's always ways to kind of analyze that in greater depth. And this tool I found very, very useful in my classes and with the greater essay writings, because you're looking at, in those purposes, 5 to 10 sources for most of our history and social science classes. So definitely would look at that a little bit more closely. And if anybody has any questions with it after, they can certainly ask me or email me at the end, and I'll go through any of that with them, as well as the previous strategies. Sarah, are we good to go into, are we going to go into 2 breakout rooms or 3 breakout rooms? What are we looking at here?
Yeah, so we'll open up 3. If you're interested in the French breakout group or chat, then just don't leave this main area.
Share some of your favorite supplemental sources that you use in your classroom. Kind of make it more of a freestyle here at the last thing. If there's something that you think is a really valuable source or method that you use in your classes, go ahead and share those at that time. Thank you.
Thank you all. Good night, folks. Take good care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. There's always the crunch of time here on these nights, but great conversations in our breakout room. Chelsea, you got cut off there a little bit, but definitely, as I said, anybody who's interested in TI, let me know, and I'll do my best to do what I can to help you through that process of applying and letting you know what it's about. With that, we're going to go to Sarah for presidential address.
Okay. Well, thank you. Okay. Well, I just wanted to share some remarks because, as you know, this is our very last session of our institute, last of 4. So it's this informative and transformative series of panels dedicated to exploring the significance of challenging conversations in the classroom. I'm filled with profound gratitude and admiration for each and every one of you who has contributed to this learning journey. In our roles as educators, we're entrusted not only with imparting knowledge, but also with fostering critical thinking, empathy, and understanding among our students. It's through this courageous and conscientious facilitation of challenging conversations that we fulfill this duty, empowering our students to navigate the complexities of the world with open hearts and minds, compassion, and the tools to think critically. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors, SANC, Elections Canada, AEFO, OSSTF District 9, and Windsor Essex Catholic District School Board. We're appreciative of their continued support and generosity. This institute would not have been as successful and meaningful without our amazing panelists. These panelists have gifted us their time, expertise, and challenged us to hold space for reflective discourse. As we bring this series to a close, let us carry forward the invaluable insights and strategies gleaned from our discussions, infusing our classrooms with a renewed sense of purpose and possibility. Let us embrace the inherent challenges of facilitating difficult conversations as opportunities for growth, transformation, and deeper connection with our students. OHASSTA-AESHO has historically hosted an in-person conference. However, as times are changing, we're trying to navigate new ways to meet the needs of educators in Ontario. Our committee of passionate volunteers have worked tirelessly over the last several months to organize this institute. I want to express my sincere gratitude to each and every one of them for continuing their commitment to education and professional growth. In terms of logistics, a survey will be shared via email. One of the questions on the survey will be regarding a certificate of participation in this institute. If you're interested in receiving a certificate, be sure to answer yes on the survey, and one will be sent to you electronically. To each of the dedicated participants in our institute, thank you for your dedication, your passion, and your unwavering commitment to education.
All right. So thank you so much for that address, Sarah. And we couldn't have done it without your leadership as well. So please, we thank you for everything you've done to make this institute possible. And just as Sarah mentioned, we will be sending out a survey. And from that survey, you will be asked if you would like to receive a certificate like this for your participation in our institute. So it's important that you do complete the survey, just because that's where we'll be getting your information that is required to send these out to you. And just for your reference, we will be sending out an English and a French certificate. So you will be receiving both. And that's just a token to just show our gratitude for you to come to our sessions here, and your commitment to empowering students and protecting our democracy, and what you do in your classroom.
Awesome. So my honor then, I guess, to say once again, thank you for everyone who's attended over all these sessions. And it's been our pleasure as a group to present some different speakers, and also to be learners ourselves. In the process, we hope that you'll share this information with some of your colleagues moving forward, so that they can attend other OHASTA events and institutes in the future, and possibly some local events that OHASTA is going to get into. Stay tuned for that, and follow us on our socials for that information. And if you have any questions, reach out to somebody on the committee, and they'll be more than happy to help you find a way to become involved if you're interested in that as well. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you again, and have a great evening.